The morning of June 19th, 1944, 0657 hours, Lieutenant Zenji Abe pushes his Mitsubishi A6M0 to 22,000 feet over the Philippine Sea, 70 miles west of Guam. His oxygen mask hisses with each breath. The sun climbs behind him, turning the ocean below into hammered silver. Below, 68 other Japanese aircraft form up in loose groups: Zeros, Judy dive bombers, Jill torpedo planes. First wave of Operation Ago, Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa's plan to destroy the American carrier fleet in one decisive battle. Abe has flown combat missions since 1942. 31 confirmed victories. Coral Sea, Eastern Solomons, Santa Cruz. He survived when better pilots died. Now, at 26 years old, he commands a 6-plane division of Zeros, assigned to escort the strike package to the American carriers. Intelligence reports say the Americans have 15 carriers somewhere to the east, the largest concentration of naval power in history. Abe's orders are simple: protect the bombers until they reach their targets. Shoot down any American fighters that try to interfere. Return to base. He's done this dozens of times. The procedure is familiar. The outcome is always uncertain. But Abe knows what to expect. American fighters will patrol randomly above their carriers. Some will be positioned correctly to intercept. Most won't. The battle comes down to who sees whom first, who has altitude advantage, who executes better tactics. Individual skill matters. Pilot against pilot, aircraft against aircraft. This is how air combat has always worked. Abe doesn't know that 130 miles to his east, a radar operator aboard USS Lexington is already watching a green phosphorescent blip on his scope that represents Abe's formation. Doesn't know that a fighter direction officer is calculating intercept geometry, assigning vectors to Hellcat divisions, coordinating the movements of 50 aircraft across 3 different altitudes. Doesn't know that what he thinks will be a conventional fighter engagement is about to become something entirely different. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching. From today, the Japanese formation takes 12 minutes to complete its assembly. Zeros at high altitude, dive bombers in the middle, torpedo planes lowest. Abe positions his division 2,000 feet above the main formation, where they can dive on any American fighters that appear. Standard doctrine. Proven tactics. He's used this formation at Coral Sea, at Santa Cruz, at a dozen smaller engagements. It works because Japanese Zeros can outturn any American fighter at low speeds. If the Americans dive through the formation, Zeros above can intercept them. If Americans try to climb, Zeros can dive with speed advantage. At 0700 hours, the strike package turns east toward the American fleet. Abe checks his fuel gauge. Enough for 3 hours flight time at cruising power, maybe 20 minutes of combat maneuvering. Then the flight back to Guam. Tight margins, but workable. The Japanese have always operated with tight margins. Fuel discipline is second nature. What Abe doesn't know is that at this exact moment, aboard battleship USS Alabama, an SK-2 air search radar has detected his formation at 150 miles range. The radar return appears as a bright spot on a circular cathode ray tube display. An enlisted operator calls out bearing and range, 270 degrees, range 150 miles, altitude unknown, large formation. In the Combat Information Center aboard Lexington, a plotter marks the contact on a large transparent vertical board using a red grease pencil. Raid 1. The mark shows Abe's position, his heading, his approximate speed. The fighter direction officer studies the plot. He can see everything: the Japanese formation, the American carriers, the Hellcat divisions already airborne on combat air patrol. The geometry is clear. The Japanese are 70 minutes away at current speed. The Hellcats are scattered across 40 miles of ocean at various altitudes. The fighter director needs to position them 60 miles west at Angels 20,000 feet altitude to catch the Japanese before they can begin their attack dive. He picks up his radio microphone. Vector calls go out to multiple Hellcat divisions. Standby 25, come right heading 280, climb to Angels 20. Standby 18, maintain heading, Angels 22. The Hellcats acknowledge and maneuver. The plot updates. Green marks showing friendly fighters begin converging toward a single intercept point that Abe, 70 miles away, cannot see and does not know exists. Abe scans the sky, methodically, left, right, above, below, looking for the glint of sunlight on canopy glass that betrays an enemy fighter's position. He sees nothing but empty blue sky and scattered cumulus clouds at 15,000 feet. The ocean below stretches to the horizon in every direction. No ships visible. The American carriers must be farther east than intelligence estimated. That's fine. The strike package has fuel to search. At 0740 hours, Abe's radio crackles with a transmission from the strike coordinator. Formation tightened up. Maintain interval. Continue on heading. Nothing unusual. Standard flight discipline. What the transmission doesn't mention, because the strike coordinator doesn't know, is that American radar operators are now tracking the formation at 120 miles range. The plot in Lexington's Combat Information Center shows Raid 1 steadily closing. The Hellcats are almost in position. The Americans have something Japan never developed, not just radar. The Japanese have radar, Type 2 air search radar, installed on carriers with 50-mile range, but Japanese radar is used for detection only. Once a contact appears, Japanese carriers launch fighters and send them in the general direction of the threat. What happens next depends on visual sighting and individual pilot initiative. There's no coordination between ships, no systematic method for positioning fighters at optimal intercept points, no unified command structure. The Americans built something different. They took radar detection, radio communication, plotting techniques, and fighter direction doctrine and integrated them into a coordinated system. Multiple ships with radar create overlapping coverage. All contacts appear on plotting boards in combat information centers aboard multiple carriers. Fighter directors watch the entire tactical picture develop in real time. They have radio contact with every Hellcat in the air. They can see the fighters on the plot. They can see the incoming raid. They can calculate intercept courses and issue vectors that position fighters precisely where they need to be. Abe has no idea this system exists. Japanese intelligence never reported it. Japanese pilots who encountered it didn't survive to describe it. The few who did survive assumed the Americans were lucky, or that they had spies on Japanese carriers reporting strike launches. Nobody understood the Americans had fundamentally changed how air defense worked. At 0753 hours, Abe's formation reaches 90 miles from the American carriers. Still no visual contact. The ocean below remains empty. Abe wonders if intelligence was wrong about the carrier positions. It's happened before. Navigation over open ocean is difficult. Cloud cover obscures landmarks. A 10-degree error in heading over 200 miles puts you 60 miles off course. Then, at Angels 22, 30 miles ahead and 2,000 feet above Abe's altitude, 16 Hellcats appear from behind a cloud bank. They're perfectly positioned. Altitude advantage. Sun behind them, approaching from the one direction where Abe's formation is most vulnerable. The Americans aren't searching randomly. They're not patrolling their carriers in wide circles hoping to spot attackers. They're sitting in exactly the right position to intercept Abe's strike package before it gets anywhere near bombing range. Abe's first thought is that the Americans got lucky. Random patrol happened to be in the right place at the right time. It happens. Combat is chaos. Luck matters as much as skill. But something about the American formation bothers him. They're not flying a search pattern. They're flying a direct intercept course toward Abe's formation, as if they knew exactly where he would be and when he would arrive. The Hellcats split into 4 divisions of 4 aircraft each. Classic American tactics. They maintain formation discipline as they dive. No individual pilots breaking off to chase targets. No showboating. They come in as coordinated groups, timing their attacks so that as one division pulls off target, the next is already beginning its run. Abe breaks radio silence. Bandits high, all divisions engage. His 6 Zeros climb hard to meet the Americans. The 1st Hellcat Division dives through the Japanese formation at 400 miles per hour. Abe sees tracers, sees a Judy dive bomber trailing smoke, sees the Hellcats extend away in a shallow climb before any Zero can turn to engage them. By the time Abe's division completes its climbing turn, the Hellcats are already 3,000 feet away, repositioning for another pass. This is wrong. American fighters in 1942 didn't fight like this. They dove in, tried to turn with Zeros, got shot down when Japanese pilots outmaneuvered them. But these Hellcats aren't trying to turn. They're using speed and altitude to control the engagement. Dive, shoot, climb away, boom and zoom tactics. The Americans call it that. Abe learned the term from intelligence briefings, but intelligence briefings don't capture what it feels like to be on the receiving end of coordinated attacks where every American pilot follows the same disciplined approach. A second division of Hellcats hits the formation from a different angle. 2 torpedo planes explode. A Zero tries to pursue, stalls in a climbing turn, gets shot to pieces by a Hellcat that appeared from nowhere. Abe's division shoots down one Hellcat. The pilot bails out. His parachute opens cleanly at 18,000 feet. The Americans will recover him, they always do. American destroyers rescue pilots. American submarines lurk near Japanese bases specifically to recover shot-down aviators. The Americans treat their pilots as valuable resources worth recovering. Japan treats pilots as expendable. At 0807, 14 minutes after the engagement began, a third wave of Hellcats appears. 8 more fighters, fresh, fully fueled, perfectly positioned. Abe realizes with cold certainty that the Americans have reserves. They're not committing everything to the initial interception. They're holding back fighters to deal with whatever breaks through the first line of defense. This level of coordination requires command and control that shouldn't exist in an air battle. Abe's strike package is disintegrating. The bombers that were supposed to attack American carriers are scattered across 20 miles of sky, maneuvering desperately to avoid American fighters. Some try to press on toward the target. Hellcats pursue and destroy them one by one. Others turn back toward Guam. Abe counts aircraft. His division started with 6 Zeros. 4 remain. The entire strike package launched with 69 aircraft. Abe estimates fewer than 30 are still flying. Then he sees something that makes his blood freeze. Far to the south, another formation of Hellcats is climbing through 15,000 feet. At least 20 aircraft. They're not engaging. They're simply positioning themselves between the remnants of Abe's strike force and the American carriers. A final barrier. Even if Japanese bombers break through the first 2 waves of Hellcats, they'll face a third wave with perfect altitude and position. Abe makes the decision every experienced pilot learns to make. This mission is lost. Staying here means dying for nothing. He keys his radio. All divisions withdraw. Return to base. Some Zeros acknowledge. Others are already gone, either retreating or dead. Abe turns west, away from the Americans, away from the mission objective, toward Guam, 70 miles distant. 3 Zeros follow him. Behind them, the Americans don't pursue. They don't need to. The strike has been defeated. For 40 minutes, Abe flies west, checking his fuel gauge every 5 minutes. The mathematics are tight. He burned fuel maneuvering in combat. Now he needs enough to reach Guam, find the airfield, and land. At his current cruise setting, he has maybe 10 minutes reserve, less if he has to maneuver again. At 0847, Guam appears on the horizon. Abe begins a gradual descent toward Orote Airfield. His 3 wingmen are still with him. That's something. 4 survivors from a 6-plane division. As Abe approaches Orote at 3,000 feet, he sees the airfield swarming with aircraft. Not Japanese aircraft, American Hellcats. At least 15 of them circling the field at various altitudes. Several are strafing the runway. Others are engaging Japanese fighters attempting to land. Abe realizes the Americans have vectored fighters to hit Japanese aircraft at their most vulnerable moment, when they're low on fuel, committed to landing, completely defenseless. He pulls up hard, trying to climb away from the airfield. Too late. Two Hellcats break from the circling pattern and turn toward his formation. Abe's fuel gauge shows less than 15 minutes remaining. Not enough to run, not enough to fight, barely enough to find an alternative landing site. The Hellcats close from behind. Abe's wingman radios that he's out of ammunition. The other two Zeros report the same. They burned everything in the earlier engagement. Abe checks his own ammunition counter. 40 rounds remaining in his two 20mm cannon, maybe 200 rounds in his two 7.7mm machine guns. Enough for one firing pass. That's all. The Hellcats don't attack. They simply position themselves behind Abe's formation and maintain distance. Following. Watching. Abe understands what's happening. The Americans are waiting for him to run out of fuel. They don't need to risk combat. They just need to wait until his engine quits and he ditches in the ocean. It's methodical. It's patient. It's exactly how you'd fight if you had so many aircraft, so much fuel, so much everything that you could afford to waste time on certainty. For 18 minutes, Abe flies north along Guam's coast, searching for any flat ground where he might land. The Hellcats follow. Abe's fuel gauge needle touches the red line. 5 minutes remaining. Maybe less. His engine begins. Running rough. First sign of fuel starvation. He has maybe 3 minutes before the propeller stops turning. Then ahead, he sees a small clearing near the beach, barely 200 meters long. Too short for a normal landing. But Abe has no choice. He drops his flaps, cuts his power to idle, begins a steep glide toward the clearing. His three wingmen scatter, looking for their own emergency landing sites. The Hellcats don't follow them down. They maintain altitude, watching 4 Japanese pilots who are no longer threats. Abe touches down hard, bounces, slams his Zero down again, stands on his brakes. The clearing ends in dense jungle. His Zero plows through undergrowth, smashes through small trees, finally stops with its nose buried in a palm trunk 50 meters short of disaster. Abe sits in his cockpit for 30 seconds, breathing hard, checking for injuries. Nothing broken. He climbs out. His Zero is wrecked. Landing gear collapsed, propeller bent, fuel tanks dry. Above him, the two Hellcats make one slow circle, then turn east toward their carriers. They don't strafe him. They don't attempt to kill a defenseless pilot on the ground. They just leave. Their job is done. Abe watches them disappear over the ocean and realizes something that makes his hands shake. The Americans didn't need to shoot him down. They positioned fighters at his airfield. They followed him until his fuel ran out. They let him crash himself. This isn't air combat. This is systematic elimination. The Americans have turned warfare into an engineering problem, and Japanese pilots are variables being removed from the equation. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. That evening, Abe sits in a makeshift shelter near the beach with 11 other Japanese pilots who survived the day's missions. Some crashed like he did. Others landed at auxiliary strips on the northern part of Guam. One pilot swam ashore after ditching his Zero when his fuel ran out 30 miles from land. A passing Japanese submarine picked him up. They share their experiences. The numbers are catastrophic. Operation Ago launched 4 major strikes on June 19th. First wave, 69 aircraft, 42 destroyed. Second wave, 109 aircraft, 70 destroyed. Third wave, 47 aircraft, 7 destroyed. Remainder turned back. Fourth wave, 82 aircraft, 30 destroyed over Guam when American fighters intercepted them while landing. Another 19 damaged beyond repair by strafing attacks. The mathematics are brutal. 299 aircraft destroyed in a single day. American losses, 30 aircraft. The kill ratio is approximately 10 to 1. But the statistics don't capture what actually happened. Abe listens to other pilots describe their engagements. Every story is the same. American fighters appeared at perfect altitudes, perfect positions, perfect timing. No matter what approach the Japanese tried, the Americans were ready. High-altitude approach, Americans were higher. Low-altitude approach, Americans dove from above. Split formation attack from multiple directions. Americans had fighters positioned to intercept each group separately. One pilot, a veteran with 23 victories, says the Americans must have radar. That's the only explanation. They're detecting our formations from 100 miles away. Another pilot disagrees. Radar can detect aircraft, but it can't position fighters with this precision. There must be something else. Command and control we don't understand. Abe doesn't participate in the discussion. He's thinking about the two Hellcats that followed him until his fuel ran out, thinking about the American fighters positioned over Orote airfield at exactly the time Japanese aircraft would be landing, thinking about the 3 waves of Hellcats that attacked his formation in coordinated sequence. The Americans aren't just using radar. They're using something that integrates radar detection with fighter coordination, some kind of system that sees the entire battle and positions forces accordingly. The next morning, June 20th, Abe receives orders. Report to Yap Island, 280 miles southwest of Guam. The remaining Japanese aircraft are being consolidated at bases farther from American carriers. Orote airfield is no longer safe. Too many American fighters patrolling. Too much damage from strafing attacks. Abe flies to Yap in a transport aircraft, one of the few operational planes still available. The flight takes 3 hours. When he arrives, he learns that Vice Admiral Ozawa's mobile fleet has retreated west. The battle is over. Japan lost 3 carriers, Taiho, Shokaku, and Hyo. American submarines sank the first 2. American aircraft damaged Hyo so severely she had to be scuttled. The carrier force that attacked Pearl Harbor, that dominated the Pacific for 2 years, is effectively finished. At Yap, Abe meets with other surviving pilots from Operation Ago. They piece together what happened. The Americans had 15 carriers. Japan had 9. The Americans had approximately 850 carrier aircraft operational. Japan had 430. The Americans had trained pilots with an average of 600 hours flight time. Japan had pilots with an average of 150 hours flight time. And many new pilots had less than 100 hours. But the decisive difference wasn't numbers or training. It was the American fighter direction system. Japanese intelligence finally has reports from pilots who survived long enough to observe American tactics. The Americans coordinate their fighters through radio direction from ships. They track incoming raids with radar and position interceptors. Precisely. They fight as a system, not as individual pilots. Abe asks the obvious question: why can't Japan develop similar tactics? The intelligence officer explains patiently. Japan has radar. Type 2 air search radar with 50-mile range. Japan has radio communication. Japan has skilled pilots. What Japan lacks is integration. Japanese carriers operate independently. Each ship tracks its own radar contacts and directs its own fighters. There's no unified command, no coordinated response. Japanese doctrine emphasizes individual initiative and fighting spirit. The concept of centralized fighter direction contradicts cultural values about warrior independence. Even if Japanese commanders wanted to implement American-style fighter direction, the institutional structure doesn't exist to support it. Combat information centers would need to be built on every carrier. Personnel would need to be trained. Doctrine would need to be rewritten. Equipment would need to be standardized. The process would take years. Japan doesn't have years. The Americans are already preparing to invade the Philippines. Abe spends the next 3 weeks at Yap, training replacement pilots. They're 19 years old with 60 hours flight time. Most have never seen combat. Abe teaches them basic formation flying, how to perform a split S, how to execute a high-side gun run. What he can't teach them is situational awareness, the instinctive sense of where enemy fighters are without seeing them, the judgment to know when to attack and when to run. Those skills come from experience. These pilots don't have time to gain experience. July 4th, 1944, Abe leads a patrol of 4 Zeros on a training flight. They're practicing intercept procedures, climbing to altitude, maneuvering to simulate attacking a bomber formation. At Angels 15, Abe spots a lone American aircraft 20 miles to the east. It's a Navy PBY Catalina flying boat. probably on reconnaissance. Slow, vulnerable, an easy kill. Abe signals his flight to attack. They dive toward the Catalina from altitude. The American aircraft doesn't attempt to evade. It maintains course and altitude. Abe closes to 1,000 meters, lines up his shot, prepares to fire. Then he sees them. 16 Hellcats climbing through 10,000 feet, perfectly positioned between his Zeros and their base. They were hiding low, invisible, against the ocean surface, until Abe committed to attacking the Catalina. Now they're climbing to intercept. The Catalina was bait. Abe breaks off the attack, rolls his Zero into a split S, and dives away. His 3 wingmen follow. The Hellcats don't pursue aggressively. They don't need to. They've accomplished their mission. The Catalina continues its reconnaissance flight unharmed. 4 Japanese fighters are fleeing back to base, unable to interfere with American operations. When Abe lands at Yap, he writes a report for his commander. The Americans are using coordinated tactics between reconnaissance aircraft and fighters. They position fighters outside visual range, use the reconnaissance aircraft to draw attackers, then intercept from advantageous positions. This level of coordination requires radio communication and pre-planned procedures. Japanese forces have nothing equivalent. His commander reads the report and files it. There's nothing that can be done with the information. Japan cannot match American coordination or American resources. The best Japanese forces can do is fight with maximum spirit and hope to inflict enough casualties that America will negotiate a peace settlement rather than invade the home islands. Abe knows this strategy is fantasy. He's seen the American system. He's seen how they position fighters, how they coordinate attacks, how they maintain combat air patrol for hours while Japanese fighters operate on minimal fuel reserves. The Americans fight like a machine, every part working together with precision. Japan fights like individual warriors, brave and skilled, but unable to match systematic coordination. August 1944. Abe is transferred to the Philippines. He's assigned to the 201st Air Group, flying from Clark Field near Manila. The group has 30 operational Zeros. Pilots joke bitterly that they're the 201st because they started with 200 aircraft and now have 1 left. The Americans are preparing to invade. MacArthur's forces are island-hopping toward the Philippines. American carriers are conducting strikes against Japanese positions throughout the region. Abe flies defensive patrols, scrambling to intercept American bombers when radar detects incoming raids. The pattern is always the same. Radar picks up a formation 80 miles out. Japanese fighters scramble. By the time they climb to intercept altitude, American fighters are already positioned above them. The Zeros either have to fight through the Hellcat screen to reach the bombers, or they have to evade and survive. Most engagements last less than 15 minutes. The Americans have such numerical superiority that prolonged combat means certain death for Japanese pilots. Abe develops a tactic: engage briefly, damage 1 bomber if possible, break off before the Hellcats can coordinate a response. Survival matters more than victory. A pilot who lives can fight tomorrow. A dead pilot is replaced by a 19-year-old with 60 hours training who won't survive. His first combat mission. September 12th. Abe shoots down his 32nd victory, a Grumman TBF Avenger torpedo bomber. He catches it during its bomb run, fires a 3-second burst from his 20mm cannon, watches the Avenger's starboard engine explode. The bomber rolls inverted and crashes into Manila Bay. 3 American crew members die. Abe feels nothing. No satisfaction, no pride, just a mechanical acknowledgement that he performed a task. Shooting down 1 bomber doesn't matter. The Americans will send 10 more tomorrow, 20 the day after. The mathematics are inexorable. October 19th, 1944. American forces land on Leyte. MacArthur returns to the Philippines. The largest naval battle in history begins. The Battle of Leyte Gulf involves hundreds of ships and thousands of aircraft. Japan commits its remaining carriers, now with minimal aircraft, as decoys to lure American carriers away from the landing beaches. The plan is for Japanese battleships to break through and destroy the invasion transports. Abe participates in a strike against American escort carriers off Samar. His group of 8 Zeros escorts kamikaze aircraft, special attack pilots who will deliberately crash their planes into American ships. The concept appalls Abe. Not because of the sacrifice. Japanese pilots have always been willing to die. But because using pilots as guided bombs represents admission that conventional tactics have failed completely. The kamikaze attacks at Samar succeed partially. Several escort carriers are damaged, but American fighters and anti-aircraft fire destroy most of the special attack aircraft before they reach their targets. Abe's group loses 6 Zeros. He survives again, but begins to wonder if survival is luck or curse. Every pilot he trained with is dead. Every friend he made is gone. He's still flying because he's skilled enough and careful enough to avoid situations where skill doesn't matter. November 1944, American forces secure Leyte. Japanese air resistance collapses. The 201st Air Group is down to 8 operational aircraft. Abe is promoted to lieutenant commander and given command of the survivors. It's a meaningless honor. Commanding 8 pilots doesn't require a commander. December. Americans land on Mindoro. Abe flies his last combat mission. He leads 4 Zeros in an attack against American ships in Mindoro Harbor. American radar detects them 60 miles out. When Abe's formation reaches the target area, 30 Hellcats are waiting at every altitude from 5,000 to 20,000 feet. Abe doesn't even attempt to engage. He turns his formation around and retreats to Clark Field without firing a shot. 1 Zero is shot down by pursuing Hellcats. 3 make it back. That evening, Abe calculates the mathematics of his war. He's flown combat missions for 2 years and 4 months. 32 confirmed victories. He's been shot down 0 times. Though he's crash-landed damaged aircraft 4 times, he's survived when better pilots died. Now he commands 3 pilots flying 3 aircraft against an enemy with thousands of planes and unlimited resources. January 1945. Clark Field is evacuated. The remaining Japanese aircraft fly to Formosa. Abe goes with them. In Formosa, he's assigned to training duty again. There are no combat missions to fly. Japan has lost air superiority completely. American B-29s bomb Japanese cities with impunity. American carriers operate wherever they want. The war is over, except for the dying. March, Americans invade Okinawa. Abe volunteers to fly kamikaze missions. His request is denied. He's too valuable as a training instructor. The Americans have turned air defense into a science. Japan needs experienced pilots to teach the next generation how to survive against American technology, even though everyone knows the next generation won't survive either. April. President Roosevelt dies. Japanese propaganda claims this proves America is losing its will to fight. Abe knows better. He's seen the American system. Losing one leader changes nothing when the system itself continues functioning. May. Germany surrenders. Japan stands alone against America, Britain, and the Soviet Union. Abe receives orders to return to mainland Japan. He flies to Kyushu, is assigned to the 343rd Air Group, one of the last operational fighter units. The group has 30 aircraft. The Americans have thousands. June and July. American carriers launch strikes against Japan's home islands. Abe flies defensive patrols. The engagements are one-sided massacres. American fighters outnumber Japanese defenders 20-1. American pilots have so much experience and training that even average American pilots are more dangerous than most Japanese pilots. Abe shoots down 3 more Hellcats, bringing his total to 35 victories. Each kill requires him to use every skill he's learned over 3 years. The Americans keep coming. August 6th, an atomic bomb destroys Hiroshima. Abe hears the news with numb acceptance. The Americans have built a weapon that can destroy an entire city in 1 instant. Of course they have. The same industrial system that produced 12,000 Hellcats, that built a fighter direction system Japan couldn't match, that coordinated 50 fighters through radio vectors from ships 100 miles away. Of course, that system could build an atomic bomb. August 9th, Nagasaki. August 15th, Emperor Hirohito announces Japan's surrender. Abe sits in the ready room at Kasanohara Air Base, listening to the radio broadcast. 37 pilots are present. Some weep. Others sit in silence. Abe feels neither grief nor relief, just exhaustion. The war is over. He survived. Out of all the pilots he trained with, flew with, fought alongside, he's one of maybe a dozen who lived through the entire conflict. Not because he was the best pilot, because he learned early that individual skill couldn't overcome systematic superiority. He learned to fight carefully, to survive, to avoid engagements where bravery meant death and caution meant living another day. After the surrender, Abe returns to civilian life. He opens a small restaurant in Osaka. He never discusses his war service. When customers learn he was a fighter pilot, they ask how many planes he shot down. He says he doesn't remember. It's a lie. He remembers every single one. 35 American aircraft, 35 pilots. Some survived, some didn't. Abe doesn't know which and prefers not to imagine. 1951. The American occupation ends. Japan begins rebuilding. Abe's restaurant prospers. He marries, has 2 children, lives quietly. He has nightmares sometimes, not about combat, about running out of fuel while Hellcats follow patiently, waiting for his engine to quit, about seeing green phosphorescent blips on a radar screen he never actually saw, but imagines every time he closes his eyes. 1964. American veterans begin visiting Japan. Some want to tour battlefields. Others want to meet former enemies. A retired U.S. Navy pilot visits Abe's restaurant. His name is Thomas Richardson. He flew Hellcats from USS Lexington during June 1944, the Battle of the Philippine Sea. He asks Abe if he participated. Abe confirms he did. Richardson explains that he was a fighter director in Lexington's Combat Information Center. He didn't fly on June 19th. He was in a darkened room, watching radar scopes, marking plotting boards, issuing vectors to Hellcat pilots. He directed the intercept of Raid 1, 69 Japanese aircraft. He positioned 50 Hellcats to destroy them before they reached the carriers. Abe asks the question he's wondered about for 20 years. How did you position the fighters so perfectly? Richardson explains the Combat Information Center, the radar detection at 150 miles range, the plotting boards showing both Japanese formations and American fighters, the radio vectors that positioned interceptors exactly where they needed to be, the systematic coordination between multiple carriers, the integration of technology and doctrine into a weapon the Japanese couldn't counter. Abe listens and realizes Richardson is describing exactly what he suspected on June 19th, 1944. When he watched Hellcats appear from perfect positions over and over, the Americans had built a system. They'd taken radar, radio, plotting procedures, and fighter direction doctrine, and combined them into coordinated warfare that treated individual pilots not as warriors, but as components in a machine. Richardson says the system was developed over 2 years. After Midway, after the Navy realized that fighting blind meant carriers could be sunk by attacks they never saw coming, engineers improved radar. Communications officers developed better radio procedures. Tactical experts designed fighter direction doctrine. Training officers created schools. Everything came together by June 1944. Abe asks if Richardson ever felt guilty about the one-sided nature of the battle. Richardson considers the question carefully, then says that guilt implies doing something wrong. The American system killed thousands of Japanese pilots, but the alternative was letting Japanese bombers sink American carriers and kill thousands of American sailors. War is horror, regardless of how it's fought. The side with better systems minimizes its own casualties. That's not guilt. That's responsibility to your own people. They talk for 3 hours. 2 veterans from opposite sides discussing a battle where one fought with systematic advantage. The other never understood until it was too late. When Richardson leaves, he shakes Abe's hand and says that the war proved individual courage cannot defeat industrial organization. Japan had brave pilots. America had a system. The system won. Abe dies April 27th, 1997. He's 79 years old. His obituary mentions he was a fighter pilot during World War II. It doesn't mention his 35 victories or his survival against impossible odds. It doesn't mention that he understood, earlier than most Japanese pilots, that the war was lost not because Japan lacked courage, but because America had built systematic superiority that individual warriors couldn't overcome. The lesson Zenji Abe learned over the Philippine Sea on June 19, 1944, remains valid today. Modern warfare is about systems, radar detection, radio communication, coordinated tactics, trained personnel, industrial production, logistics, maintenance, replacement pipelines. Every component must work together. Individual weapons or individual warriors, no matter how advanced or skilled, cannot overcome systematic integration. Japan produced legendary pilots: Saburo Sakai, Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, Tetsuzo Iwamoto, men with 60, 80, 100 victories. Their skill was extraordinary. Their courage was absolute. But America produced 12,000 Hellcats and 800 carrier pilots trained to coordinate their attacks through radio direction from ships that could see everything on radar screens. The legends died or survived through luck. The system won the war. That's the hardest truth of modern warfare. Courage doesn't matter if you're fighting the wrong kind of fight. Skill doesn't matter if the enemy can see you coming and position forces to counter your every move. Individual heroism cannot overcome systematic technological superiority. Zenji Abe learned this lesson June 19, 1944, 70 miles west of Guam, when he watched 50 Hellcats destroy his formation before it reached the American carriers. He spent the rest of his life remembering that truth. History proves he was right. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.